I took this photo with an 8-year-old camera that I got for 250 bucks from a secondhand store. Needless to say, I think it's a pretty good purchase. Before I get into this video, I want to say thank you for the growth of this channel so far. It means a lot to me, and I'm excited to keep doing this. I wanted to remind you also to subscribe, as I will be producing new content like this every Sunday. Thanks, and back to the video. The Sony A6000 was first introduced in 2014 as the world's fastest autofocusing camera. Its MSRP was $700 with the 16-50 kit lens. For a camera that is this old, it still does have really good specs, even for 2022 standards. With a 24.3 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor and an ISO range of 100 up to 25,600, 179 autofocus points, shooting up to 11 frames per second, and video specs of 60 frames per second in 1080p. It really is a steal for anything under $500. But let's talk about some of the positives and negatives of a camera like this and see if it might be the right choice for you. First up on the positives list, photo specs. With phones getting better and better at taking photos, it may be stupid to get an 8-year-old camera at this point. But the 24.3 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor is great for photography. This camera provides a continuous shooting rate of 11 frames per second. Which even by today's standards is pretty good for most cheaper cameras, as they produce somewhere in the range of 7 to 9 for a DSLR and usually around 10 for most of the other full frame cameras out on the market right now. Another big positive is the Sony E-mount. The nice thing about the Sony E-mount is you have so many lenses to choose from. You have a full line of lenses from third-party manufacturers like Rokinon, Sigma, Tamron, just to name a few, and not to mention there are plenty of adapters out there to pretty much adapt to any of the companies that you can think of. Pentax, Canon, Leica, Nikon. If you can think of a company, I'm sure there's an adapter out there somewhere to the Sony E-mount. Next up, video specs. In the age of 4K, 6K, and 8K, it's kind of hard to buy a camera that can only shoot 1080p. But then when I say there's a camera in 2022 that you can shoot 60 FPS in 1080p for $250, that changes things a little bit. For someone who travels or wants just some clips of the family and the ability to take photos, this is a great deal. There are some things to be desired when it comes to the video specs of this camera, but it does give you some great tools in video mode, even for being a camera that is 8 years old. Like manual focus peaking to make sure that your focus is on point, and zebra function to make sure you retain those highlights when you're trying to expose. You can set a center marker, guide frame, safety zone, and aspect marker, which I admit are kind of reaching for the video specs of this camera. But it is nice to have when you switch over to video mode and you want some extra features for a camera this old. All right, next up, body design. This body is compact and lightweight. It's tiny and nice when you just want to put it in a bag, kind of forget about it, and not have to worry about lugging something around all day. It literally takes up no room. The electronic viewfinder is just okay, and it gets the job done, but it's nothing really to write home about. And the 3-inch back display is just all right also. The A6000 does sport a tilting screen for 90 degrees upwards and 40 degrees downward rotation. There is no touchscreen though. However, there are a lot of custom functions that you can set on the camera to customize it the way you want to. And some other notable positives, the fact that you can use older V30 cards. For a 512 gigabyte card, you can get about 11 hours of film time. Now you will be limited to the 30-minute record time of this camera, but realistically, 30 minutes on this camera, that's not bad. You also have the ability for tracking autofocus, which honestly isn't super reliable on this camera, but in a pinch, it's nice to have. Now let's get into some of the less positive things in this camera. And remember, we can't be too hard on this camera because as of making this video, it is 8 years old. And for its time, the things this camera did were pretty amazing. All right, first up on the negatives list, no IBIS. We are spoiled in today's world with almost every new camera coming with internal image stabilization. The lack of IBIS in this camera makes you realize how nice it is to have that feature. When using tighter lenses, you find that you shake a lot, as this camera weighs practically nothing, and together with a lens, it's kind of off balanced, and you find yourself moving around a lot. When using a lens with OSS, it does help quite a bit, but missing that extra stop of IBIS is still noticeable. Lack of picture profiles. This camera does not have S-Log, H-Log, S-Cinetone, or any of the Cine profiles. Instead, you get creative styles. You get a lot of them, and I pretty much only shoot in neutral. And in post, you can add contrast and saturation to get an image that you're looking for. Because you don't have picture profiles, there is a lack of dynamic range in this camera. You can still produce beautiful looking content. Just know that you won't have as much dynamic range in this camera or customizable features when it comes to color grading in post. Battery life. This camera uses the older and smaller NP-FW50 batteries, which means you're gonna have to change these batteries out quite a bit if you're shooting a lot of photo and video. You have a 30-minute record time in this camera, but the battery will only last you about 45 minutes to an hour. For photos, it's rated around 280 to 325 shots, which I will say is pretty accurate. You can get these batteries really cheap, and I think you should have at least 2 to 3 in your bag if you're walking around, and because you're gonna change them out quite often. There are better cameras out there. For the price, it's a great camera. But that being said, there are options out there that give you more features for a close price. You can find the A6000 super cheap, but you will have to add a lens, unless you're already a Sony shooter and you have lenses sitting around. But the Sony ZV-1 is only a couple $100 more if you find it used, and it gives you 4K 30 with image stabilization and picture profiles. The bigger APS-C sensor found in the A6000 will give you better low light, depth of field, and dynamic range. But it is worth mentioning that there are other alternatives out there for close to the same price point that may give you more things that you're looking for. I'm sure there are a lot of things I left out about this camera, and the more I use it, I may make an update to this video in the future. But for a camera that you can find super cheap and in my eyes competes with the newer, more expensive ZV-1 and ZV-E10 that was discontinued, it produces a great image with few caveats. But if there is something that you would like to know, make sure you leave a comment down below and I will respond to you, and we can test this thing out together. Thank you for watching. Hope you got something out of this. We'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.